Aunt Emma, do you know that Mom said that you won't go anywhere anyway? She said it almost in a whisper, swirling melted ice cream across the edge of the plate. My niece, Lucy, was sprawled at the kitchen table, kicking her legs and looking utterly lost in time, like she'd just woken up and didn't know what hour it was. 7 years old and still blissfully unaware of the difference between secrets and simple truths. The silence in the house was thick, a typical suburban evening in Columbus, Ohio. The hum of the refrigerator, cicadas chirping outside, the relentless tick of the clock on the wall counting down the seconds with unnerving precision. I froze, holding a mug in my hands. "What did you say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle. Lucy shrugged, a careless little gesture. "Well, Mom told Dad you'd still help, because you always do, even when you don't want to." She looked up at me, her eyes bright and innocent, with no hint of malice. And that's what got to me, really. A strange, heavy feeling settled over me, like the earth beneath a house starting to crack. Not a sudden burst of something, not a sharp pain, yet just a cold, slow recognition struggling to form itself. I had always helped. I'd picked Lucy up from school when my sister was running late. I'd sat with her on weekends. I'd lent her money for temporary difficulties, problems that never seemed to truly resolve. I'd moved closer when Mom said it would be better for everyone. "Lucy," I said, carefully, "what else did Mom say?" She frowned, trying to recall, and leaned across the table towards me as if she were about to reveal a conspiracy. "If I told you too soon, I could ruin everything. That's why she shouldn't have said it, but I forgot. Sorry. Ruin everything." The words hung in the air, sticky and heavy. I smiled. Of course I smiled. It's what I always do when something inside starts to break. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said, rising to put the mug in the sink. My hands were trembling slightly. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself. 30 years old, a calm face, dark hair pulled back in a loose braid. Emma, the one everyone said could handle anything. The one who seemed to occupy a space in our family, a comfortable, empty space for others to fill. I didn't know what they were hiding yet. But in that moment, on that small kitchen table in Ohio, I felt it. This wasn't going to be a small thing. And after that conversation, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that I wouldn't be the same person again. Sarah came home late. I heard the sharp crack of the front door as she was tucking Lucy into bed. She was humming a little tune, a small, bright sound that spoke of a day well spent, a stark contrast to my own. You're still here," she called out from the hallway, not bothering to look up. "Great! I knew you'd cover for me." That phrase landed like a small, sharp stone. It was exactly what Lucy had said, a simple statement of fact, as if my presence was simply part of the furniture. I descended the stairs. Sarah was already kicking off her shoes, scrolling through her phone against the kitchen counter. My older sister always presented a carefully constructed facade, a neat bun, an expensive handbag, an unwavering posture. Beside her, I felt like a shadow. "Lucy's asleep," I said. "She's exhausted." "Poor thing," Sarah smiled, not lifting her gaze from the screen. "Listen, Em, I need to ask you something." "Of course." "Just not now," she added immediately. "Let's talk about it tomorrow. I'm just completely drained." Finally, she looked up at me, and for a fleeting moment, a flicker of unease passed across her eyes. It vanished quickly. "Okay," I replied automatically. That's how it always happened. Conversations postponed, details fading, decisions made without my input. Anything pertaining to me seemed to be perpetually not urgent. I retreated to my room, a small guest bedroom the family had dubbed temporary. I'd been living here for 2 years now. Temporarily, lying in the darkness, I repeated Lucy's words over and over. "You're not going anywhere. If you find out too soon, you can ruin everything." What was it I was meant to spoil? Fragments began to surface in my memory. Strange conversations abruptly cut short when I entered the room. Sarah's glance when I mentioned applying for jobs in other cities. My mother's subtle irritation when I spoke of renting my own place. I went down to the kitchen earlier than anyone else that morning. Outside, a gray, damp dawn was unfolding over Ohio, a typical Ohio sky, as if even the heavens were hesitant to begin a new day. I poured myself a cup of coffee, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to ask a question I'd always dismissed. What if they were truly counting on me in a way I hadn't considered? The answer arrived swiftly. My phone vibrated. A message from Mom. "Emma, we need to talk tonight. It's important. I hope you'll understand." The word important felt foreign, jarringly out of place. It was a belated arrival in my life. I took a slow sip of the bitter coffee and understood. Today, I would learn the truth they'd been keeping from me. And perhaps, today, I would no longer be considered invisible. The gathering was in the living room, closer to evening than I'd anticipated. Mom had insisted on Mike Sarah's husband being here, and that was already a bad sign. Family, talks, never assembled without a specific reason, a sense of impending weight. I was sitting on the edge of the sofa, folding my hands in my lap like a student waiting for a stern reprimand. Across from me, Mom was perfectly upright, her face set in that particular expression she used when delivering something unpleasant but necessary. Sarah was nestled beside her feet tucked beneath her, while Mike stood by the window, attempting to appear unaffected by the whole scene. "Emma," Mom began, her voice carefully measured, "we've been wrestling with how to tell you this." The word hung in the air, a small, sharp weight. "Tell me what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah coughed, a nervous, hurried sound. "It's just a formality, really. Don't get all worked up about it." I looked at her. "Lucy said I could ruin things if I found out sooner." The silence thickened, heavy and uncomfortable. Mom's lips pressed into a tight line. "Children are prone to exaggeration," she said dismissively. "Don't give it so much importance." "Then why do you all look so strained?" My voice wavered slightly, but I didn't break eye contact. Mike let out a sigh and finally turned around. "Emma, the truth is, we're in a bit of a bind. Temporary, of course." That word temporary felt like a cold splash of water. Mom folded her hands across her lap. "Sarah has received a job offer in Chicago." I blinked. "Chicago?" Sarah offered a smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's a big opportunity, Emma, a real shot. We can't just let it pass us by." "Congratulations," I said, the words sincere, but followed almost immediately by, "And what about me?" The silence stretched out, a palpable thing. "We thought," Mom began slowly, "that Lucy would be better off staying here, for a while at least." "For a while," I pressed. "Until Sarah has settled in," Mom said. "A new city, a new job, it would be difficult for the child." A wave of coldness washed over me. "And?" I asked, my voice tight. Sarah turned to me, her whole body focused on me. "You're still here, aren't you? You're living here. Lucy loves you. You're like a second mother to her." Second mother, without rights, without a choice, without any discussion. "You want me to," I stammered. "To what?" "To live with Lucy," Mom said, her voice steady. "To look after her, a year, maybe 2. 2 years, I repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Time flies," Mike interjected, his voice low. "And you don't exactly have anywhere urgent to go." There it was, the perfectly delivered, stinging phrase, the one that cut straight to the bone. I felt the air leave my lungs. "You've already decided," I said, stating it as a fact, not a question. "We knew you'd understand," Mom said softly. "You always do." I rose to my feet, my legs unsteady. "But what if I say no?" Sarah frowned. "Emma, why are you being like this? We're family." Family. The word always seemed to wrap around my boundaries, limiting me. "I'll think about it," I said, turning and walking out of the room without waiting for permission. In my room, I leaned against the door, the cool wood a small comfort. My heart hammered against my ribs. Lucy's voice echoed in my mind. "You'll never really leave." But for the first time in a long time, I found myself wondering. What if I did? I hadn't slept until dawn. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe without me, the quiet creak of floorboards, the distant hum of traffic, Lucy's soft breathing filtering through the wall. This house had always been a cacophony of sounds, but none of them ever asked how I felt. I replayed the conversation again and again, searching for a crack, a fissure through which an excuse might escape. But it was too clear, too precise. They hadn't asked me, they'd simply announced. On the bedside table lay my laptop. I opened it almost mechanically, checking my email. In the inbox was a letter I'd been ignoring for a week. Subject: follow up on your application. Chicago. No Cleveland. No Seattle. I'd applied to jobs in several cities secretly, as if betraying my own family. I'd received a reply from Cleveland, the other end of Ohio. A 6-month contract with the possibility of extension. Nothing grand, but mine. I'd closed the email then, knowing that if I accepted, I'd have to explain. And explaining meant upsetting. And upsetting meant being bad. I opened it again. We would be pleased to hear from you by the end of the week. 2 days remained. In the morning, I descended to the kitchen before usual. Mom was already there. "You've thought about it?" she asked without a greeting. "Yes," I replied. She looked at me expectantly. "I can't." The words sounded softer than I anticipated, but firm enough. Mom froze. "Emma," she said, "you're not considering the consequences now." "I've been thinking about them my whole life," I responded. "Just not my own." She sighed as if I were stubbornly resisting. "You're being selfish if you refuse," she said calmly. "Sarah is counting on you." The word selfish used to frighten me. Now it just stung. "I applied for a job," I said. "In Cleveland, they responded." Mom paled. "You did this behind our backs," I almost laughed. "And you decided my life without consulting me." We looked at each other for a long moment. Then Mom averted her gaze. "You'll destroy the family," she said. I thought of Lucy, her honest eyes, and the way she'd spoken the truth without understanding its implications. "No," I said. "I'm simply choosing to stop being convenient." In that moment, I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew with a startling certainty that there was no turning back. The news hit me that day, of course. Mom delivered it, as she always did, in that clipped, matter-of-fact way, presenting it as a problem demanding immediate attention. There was no softening, no gentle preamble, just a blunt declaration. My sister burst into the house that evening, still bundled in her jacket, breathless. "You're really going?" she demanded, her gaze pinning me with an accusation, as if I'd committed some terrible offense. "You actually intend to leave?" I was sitting at the kitchen table, exactly where Lucy had uttered those fateful words. The circle was complete. "I haven't left yet," I replied, my voice quiet. "But yes, I'm going to accept the offer." "And Lucy," her voice wavered, a tremor of concern in it. "Have you even thought about her?" "Constantly," I said. "And you?" She pressed her lips together, a tight line of discomfort. "I'm doing this for her, for our future." "Then why aren't you taking her with you?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Sarah avoided my eyes. "Chicago isn't a place for a child," she said too quickly. "I need to focus. I've got my own challenges." "So do I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She moved closer, her hand reaching out tentatively. "Look, you know how you are. You're fragile. You don't handle change well." That was it. The truth. Not about the money, not about the paperwork. It was about the perception of me, the image of a woman weakened, dependent, adrift. "You're just afraid I'll stop being a fallback option," I said, a bitter edge to my voice. Sarah's head snapped up, her expression hardening. "Don't be ridiculous." "Then why did you tell Lucy I wouldn't go anywhere?" Her face shifted, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. "She shouldn't have repeated what was said in a conversation for adults." "It was about me," I clarified, the words tasting like ash. We fell silent. Then Sarah let out a slow, shaky exhale. "You've always been like this. Quiet, easily managed, we thought." She hesitated. "We thought it was good for you. That you thrived on it." A shard of something inside me shattered and simultaneously began to rebuild. "No," I said, my voice firm. "It was comfortable for you." She offered a small, brittle smile, but a flash of anger sparked in her eyes. "You'll regret this," she warned. "When you're left all alone." I thought of Cleveland, the empty apartment, the silence that would be solely mine. "Perhaps," I replied, meeting her gaze. "But it will be my choice." Just then, footsteps echoed from the top of the stairs. Lucy stood there, clutching a well-worn stuffed rabbit. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice small and tentative. Sarah turned away, dismissing her with a curt gesture. "Lucy, go back to your room." But I had already risen to my feet. "I'll be coming back," I told my niece. "And I'll call. And you can always write to me." She nodded, seriously, with a maturity that surprised me. And in that moment, I realized that her revelation hadn't just saved me. It had given me the chance to be honest, at least with myself. The rain greeted me in Cleveland. a fine, persistent drizzle, as if the city were testing whether I'd actually come this far. I stood on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases, a strange cocktail of dread and relief churning in my stomach. For the first time, there wasn't a soul around who knew me as Emma, the one they'd all assumed I was. The apartment was smaller than the photos had suggested. An old house, creaky floors, windows overlooking a gray courtyard. But it was mine. I closed the door behind me, leaning my back against it, and I broke down. Not from sadness, exactly. From being utterly, completely overwhelmed. The first few weeks were a blur. A new job, new faces, new routes to memorize. I started saying, I need to think about that instead of course. I stopped apologizing for the silences. It turned out to be harder than any professional challenge I'd ever faced. My mom hadn't called nearly at all. Sarah, not once. Just Lucy, sending the occasional short text with emojis and questions about how I was doing. I always responded. One evening, Mike called. "Sarah's angry," he said without preamble. "She's struggling with this alone." "She's not alone," I replied. "She's with her husband, and with the decision she made." He was silent for a moment. "You've changed," he finally said. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. Yes, finally. A month later, they offered me a contract extension. I accepted without asking anyone for their opinion. That evening, I walked down to Lake Erie. The water was dark, cold, but remarkably still. I stood there, lost in thought, wondering what I'd been like before, quiet, invisible, convinced that love had to be earned. My phone vibrated. A message from Sarah. "Mom's in the hospital. Nothing serious, but we need your help." I closed my eyes. The old script was pulling me back in. I didn't reply immediately. And it was in that pause, that quiet space, that I understood. The choice was mine now, whatever it might be. The vacation wasn't granted immediately. My boss had spent a long time looking at me over the top of her glasses, as if assessing whether she could trust a newcomer who was finally starting to stand her ground. "A week," she finally said. "No more." I thanked her and stepped out of her office with the distinct feeling of moving backwards. But I told myself it wasn't backwards, it was a choice. I wasn't going because I had to. I was going because I needed to see for myself. The drive to Columbus felt shorter than before. Or maybe I was just driving faster, without the comforting illusion of control. Mom lay in her hospital bed, pale but too composed for someone who'd gone through something supposedly not serious. Seeing me, she burst into tears, beautiful, controlled tears. "I knew you'd come," she said. That sentence should have been a balm, but something tightened in my chest. "What did the doctors say?" I asked. "Observation," she replied too quickly. "Rest, nothing serious." Sarah appeared later, hugging me a little too tightly, a little too long. "It was so hard without you," she said. "Lucy keeps asking about you." Lucy burst from the room, clinging to me as if I might vanish. I sat down beside her, feeling that familiar pang in my chest. Later, when Mom had worn out and gone to sleep, I heard a conversation on the kitchen floor. I didn't eavesdrop, I just went for a glass of water. "A week is not enough," Sarah said. "She needs to stay longer." "She won't leave," Mom replied. "Not now, not when things are so unstable." I stopped, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. "What if she finds out?" Mike asked. "She won't," Mom said. "We'll say I'm worse, or that Lucy is struggling." She'd always chosen others. The silence after those words was deafening. I went back to my room and sank onto the bed. It all snapped into place too neatly, too logically. Illness. Urgency. "We need your help." Not a plea, a hook. The next morning, I asked Mom directly, "Are you really in the hospital for your heart?" She looked away. "Emma, don't start." That was enough. I packed my things in silence. Lucy watched me with wide, searching eyes. "You're leaving again?" she asked. I knelt down in front of her. "Yes, but not because I don't love you, but because if I stay, I'll disappear." She nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the truth. When I walked out of the house, no one stopped me. And that was the most honest confirmation of all. I arrived in Cleveland on autopilot. It wasn't until I closed the door of the apartment and leaned a suitcase against the wall that I allowed myself to sit on the floor. My hands trembled not from fear, but from the rage I'd been holding inside for far too long. There were no calls that day. Not from Mom, not from Sarah. It was almost a relief. The next evening, the phone rang. Mom. You ran away, she said without preamble. During the hardest time. I closed my eyes. You lied to me, I replied. This isn't a difficult moment, it's manipulation. How dare you speak to me like this? Her voice sharpened. After everything I've done for you? There it was, the old lever. You gave me life, I said. But living for me, that isn't your job. Silence hung on the other end of the line. Sarah is in hysterics, Mom said, her voice softening. Lucy is crying. Then let Sarah raise her daughter, I replied, and Lucy raise her mother. You're cruel, Emma, she said. You've always been cold. I smiled. It used to kill me. No, I simply stopped being convenient. After that conversation, I blocked her number. My hands shook as I pressed the button, but alongside the tremor came a strange, unsettling calm. At work, I slipped back into the rhythm. Colleagues started inviting me for coffee. My boss praised my report, without condescension, genuinely. A week later, Lucy texted me, Mom is angry, but I love you. I replied instantly, I love you too. It will never change. That evening, I walked to the lake. The wind was cold, clean. I stood there considering how bizarre it was. To become stronger, sometimes you have to lose family, or at least its previous version. I wasn't quiet and invisible anymore. I'd become visible for myself.